and welcome to the Deer IQ podcast, where smart hunting begins. I'm Adam Lewis, and in this episode, we're in our series, Summer Prep for Fall Success, as we continue to look at how to achieve our goal, or theme of this year, to consistently take the top deer where you hunt, and exact habits and systems needed to do that. The big question for this week is, how many spots do you need to get a chance at a deer you want to shoot every time you go out? What does that look like? And is that even possible? And yes, we have our free journal you can download below that will really help you get the most out of this podcast. Okay, so here are the top things to look for during this episode. What is the difference between a goal, a criteria, and the measuring stick as I define it when it comes to being a consistent whitetail hunter? How many times did I hunt my first year hunting compared to last year, and what was the main reason for my big difference? And what are the considerations you have to make when trying to figure out a number of spots you need to have good opportunities every time you go out? What is that number? And as usual, there's a whole lot more good stuff in there, so let's get to the podcast and up your deer IQ. All right, so we're continuing up our discussion about this chart here, and with the year goal and theme of how to be a consistent hunter, how to consistently take the top deer where you hunt year after year. And that takes certain skills, certain systems, and a certain order to go about certain things to be what I call a highly effective hunter, and that's what that would be. That's not an easy thing to do. We've started talking about that episodes here and there. The last one was with my buddy Mark. Check that one out. I'll link it below. We talked about some of these systems down here, and if you're watching this would be like at the bottom of the ladder or the pyramid, the foundational things. These are some core systems and things you need to have in place. We talked about scent control regimen and how important that is. We talked about sound management, and there's 7 principles there, or rules. We really just talked about one. We talked about being extreme about silencing your gear and really doing anything it takes to eliminate any chance to make noise with any of your gear. But there's way more to it than that. There's one that I really like, which is using cover sounds and really becoming one with your environment to make sure that when you're coming and going, you're utilizing your environment and noises in it to be completely silent. And that's a system and skill that you need to get in place. We talked about some of those, but there's more down there that we didn't get into. But that's where we have been, is these foundational systems. We talked about some myths too that you kind of need to bust, because those put a ceiling on you in your level of success. They really do. Some of these things, it could be physical shape. That's a pretty easy but a big one that is a limiting factor. But there's some myths too that we talked about. One of those was this idea of going with your gut versus a strategic strike. And what I'm teaching here and showing is that if you get to the top of this pyramid, it gets really skinny, and that's your hunt. That's your strategic hunt. I'd call it a surgical hunt. That's your strategic strike. And that takes the smallest part of that pyramid. It really should take the least amount of your time. And this week we're talking about, how many spots do you need to be able to go out and literally every time get a shot at a deer you want to potentially take, or at least get that opportunity. That seems like maybe fantasy for some people, but it is doable if you do it correctly. And this is what we're working toward in this system to get there and make that strategic and surgical strike. And I talked about going with your gut, and I think a lot of people, I think that's kind of a myth, and it's a vernacular that people throw around because it's easy to say that, but it's so ambiguous. What does it even mean? And I highly suggest, this is my point on that, is you need to know why you're going where you are and hunting when you are. You need to answer that question, why. You owe it to yourself, right? If I'm going into a spot and I don't know that question, I might just say, I'm going with my gut, if I can't answer that question. That's a low odds hunt. I don't know why the deer will be there. I don't know why I'm hunting there. I'm just kind of guessing at it. And say what you will about that. The more you can answer that question and actually ask yourself that, hold yourself accountable to that, the more you can have a why that's very solid, the more chance of success you have, and you get toward the end of this continuum that's a strategic strike. And that's where you have really high odds hunts. And so I talked about that. That's kind of I'd say a myth. And I would suggest getting away from that saying of I'm going with my gut. Actually say and know why you're hunting where and when you are. If you can't, that's probably telling you you need to at least think about it more, reevaluate that, or scout more. You need more intel. You need to know the why more. So we talked about some of those things down there, that foundation, that first level. This week we're looking at level 2. And the big question is, how many spots do you really need to have a shot at a buck or a deer that you want to shoot pretty much every time out? And I want to start with a story of me and first starting out. And this is pretty interesting. So I pulled out an old journal. My dad gave me this, and I'm showing it here for the people on video. This old journal. My dad started in 1991, which is when I started hunting. And he kept track of every time I went out hunting, and we went together. And he made notes in here. He put the dates in there. He put how many hours that we hunted and how many times we went out. And that first year, as I look at this, neither of us got a deer. I got a shot at one late in the season, a doe, and I hit it high. We never got it, never found it. And that was my one shot of the season, really for both of us. And I hunted an amazing 50 times and over 100 hours in the tree stand. That's a ridiculous amount of hunting and not getting anything. And it's interesting, and I'll give you a little background. So where we hunted we had 2 spots. We just had 2 spots. One was a 10-acre parcel, and both of us were hunting there when we hunted. 2 people on 10 acres, kind of open woods that my dad used to own. And another was a 25-acre woods where, again, we were both hunting, right? And so we hunted these a ton, and you can tell as you go through here, we didn't have a ton of encounters, but we put a lot of hard work into it, and we didn't get results, right? And yeah, over the years, obviously I learned and got better. I was a super novice as a 12-year-old. But back then we didn't have youth hunts. We didn't have an early season. It was just, hey, you're hunting with everybody else. And so I had my compound bow, and I was hunting out of tree stands. And so that was that first year. We didn't have a lot of spots, but we sure did hunt hard. And that was the results. I want to compare that, and it's a little hard to do because I'm obviously older now and have a lot more experience, but to last year. Okay, last year I had 5 shots on bucks that I wanted to shoot. These were either target bucks. 4 of them were target bucks, and one met my criteria that I'd set out before the season and before I hunted this state, right? I had 5 shots in 7 hunts. That's really highly efficient versus, compared to the old me when I was very young. And that's a huge contrast. And what you find is when you start looking at this, that I'll bring up this study, Clint McCoy's study. It was a collared buck study that shows that the first sit in a spot is your best chance to kill a buck, bar none. After that, whether you realize it or not, whether you believe it or not, your chances start going way down. It's just like a hill that drops off. That first hunt is your best bet. And so that art of the first sit, I call it, is very important in making that strategic strike. And obviously, when I was a kid, I wasn't doing that, right? We were hunting the same spots. We were hunting them hard. We were hunting them over and over again. And that does not lead to success. Last year, I was hunting many different spots to get those shots. Pretty much my first time in, and 2 of them, it took 2 times in to get those shots. But this is where I want to throw out a measuring stick. So in the past episodes, we talked about goals a little bit. We talked about criteria. For me, goals should be centered around getting systems in place. Like I have a goal, let's say, for example, to get a scent control regimen in place and really work on that and really get that in place. And that isn't a goal around a deer. That is a goal of putting something in place that helps me get a deer. And I think that's important to think about when you set goals. I don't set them on so many inches or anything like that. That for me is more a criteria. That is my criteria for when I pull the trigger or don't. And so I think those are important distinctions to make and maybe think about your goals being something you can actually measure, and I'm going to put in place this, or I'm going to fix this, and I can measure if I did it or not. And that will then lead to success. The criteria is when I'll pull the trigger or not, right? I have a certain age I'm looking for, or a certain buck, or a certain score, or whatever that is. That's the criteria you set. And then the measuring stick, though, for this to be, a highly effective hunter that's getting it done consistently on the top deer where you hunt, the measuring stick for success is, can you get it done? Are you getting those opportunities on the first or second max on one or two sits in those spots? Okay, so here's your high IQ moment. I recently pulled a couple trail cameras from public land because I wasn't getting the data I wanted, even though I thought these would be great spots this year. They were areas I envisioned big bucks hanging and definitely could, but saw several hunters walk through in mid-August and wasn't getting the buck traffic I wanted to see. So instead of getting married to a spot due to my preconceived notions and getting emotionally attached to my projections about these spots, I had to let go and be very objective about my evaluation of them. They just don't seem to be producing this year. And that's a very important thing to be able to do when scouting and talking about hunting spots. Do not make decisions up front about where you'll shoot the big one. Just be very objective and let the data do the talking and decision making for you. It's a high IQ thing to do that will lead to much better success and is something to really think about. And if you're a serious hunter who's ready to take their whitetail hunting to the next level, our new and enhanced Deer IQ test may be for you. It's a totally different test than the one we had last year and does what no other product out there can do. Personally tell you the exact improvements you need to make to consistently take great whitetail. And it includes a free consultation as well to help you take the results and set highly effective hunting goals that will actually get results. So what are you waiting for? Sign up below for the Deer IQ assessment and consultation. Okay, and now back to the podcast. You've got to be able to get a crack at them, honestly, within the first time, maybe two max, or that's it in that spot. So are you doing that? That's the measuring stick. So being honest about that. And again, if you look at this chart here, we have at the top an inverted triangle that shows what I call an ineffective hunter, and they're spending most of their time hunting. That's the big parts on top. That should not be the case if you want to be a really effective hunter. You're hunting actually very little, right? And so to get those opportunities, your best bets are the first time in, maybe one or two, like I said, and the stats show that. The Collar Buck studies show that it really tanks your opportunities and your chances go way down once you've hunted just one time. And so how can you get more one-time opportunities is a question that comes up. But the measuring stick would be, are you getting opportunities at the bucks or deer you want to shoot with just one sit or maybe two in a spot? If you aren't, then I would think about, what am I doing wrong? Something is wrong in here with what you're doing, how you're approaching it, maybe when you're hunting, something like that is wrong that you need to think about. What does it really take then? So is it just, having a first sit in a spot? Is that what it takes? Just have enough spots that every time you hunt, it's a first sit there? Or is it just that I stay out and I don't hunt that much? I just hunt a handful of times a year. That's kind of the question there in the balance. And a lot of guys, just like I did when I was young, they wear spots out. They have a few spots or maybe one spot, whatever it might be, and they really wear it out and they hunt there a lot. And that just doesn't result in high odds, right? It doesn't result in a lot of success consistently. It's not the hunting harder, as you would say. And so think of it when you think about spots and the idea of, okay, I'll call this, and this is step 2 here, diversification. Think about it like the stock market. So good investment strategy isn't just throwing all your money on one stock. That'd be a feast or famine. That's playing big time lottery. If you do that, the smart way of going about it is really diversifying, right? You have all these different stocks, all these different accounts you are putting into, and that allows you to win in the end, right? It's taking the long game approach, the big picture that allows you to do that, and not just getting married to or caught up in this one spot that I hunt and making that work. It's having a broad diversity of spots. So spot diversification. How many spots does it take? And I'm not going to tell you a number. I want to challenge you to think about how many spots you need to do that, right? And the factors that play into that, figuring out what that number is. Because there is a way to get a number. There's kind of a mathematical way to look at it, which I won't get into. My goal is to just get you to think about diversification of your hunting portfolio, your spot portfolio, and how many spots you actually honestly need to have high odds sits every time you go out, because that is definitely possible. Like I said, last year, 5 shots that I took on bucks I wanted. 4 of them were known bucks. They were targets, and one of them just met my criteria. 5 shots on 7 hunts. And that's not to brag. That's just to show that is very possible on good deer. And so start thinking about what that really takes. And as you look at your spots, this is kind of the things you should look through. So every spot is not equal, right? You look at, is it a morning or evening spot? Some spots could be both, but I've found that many spots are either just a morning spot or maybe just an evening spot because of how they set up, how you have to enter and exit the woods. And remember, your goal is to never have deer know they're being hunted, right? Also, you have time of season. And so you should look at your spots that you have in your current portfolio, I'd call it, of spots, and divide them up. Is this an early season spot? Is this a lull spot? Is this a pre-rut spot? Is this a rut spot? Is this a post-rut or late season spot? And those are kind of the different cycles of the season, I'd call it. And I kind of look at them generally in about 2-week cycles. They might not be exactly, but about every 2 weeks, you kind of have this change of those different cycles of the whitetail season. And so when are they best? Also, look at wind. When do these spots best hunt for certain wind setups? And when you start doing that, you realize that you just can't hunt the same spot anytime you want to or every time, right? You need to have a diverse portfolio to have this effect of when I go in there, I have a high odds chance of killing a buck or a deer that I want to shoot. Now, going back to the Clint McCoy study, again, the collared buck study that shows that after one sit, deer avoid those stand locations. And what it showed was it took at least 5 days for them to return to a point in the middle where they weren't really avoiding the spot, but they weren't really attracted to it either. And so that means that it took more than 5 days for them to actually be attracted back to that stand location. And I'm not sure what that number is. That might really vary from location to location, depending on where you hunt, the setup of it, the the terrain, how thick it is, all these different things. Like it might determine how much time that actually would take. But those are things to think about as well. And I would say, if we're talking about a cool-off period, like if I hunted here the first day of season, how much time do I need to give it until it's cooled off and would be like another first-time hunt? Is it a whole season? Do I have to wait another year? And according to that study, it's definitely more than 5 days. And depending on the pressure in the area and all these different things, I'd say at the minimum 2 weeks. So here's an example. So on public land where I hunt in Michigan, last year I had 2 hunts and a shot at a buck. I know that the first time in, I felt I needed to get a shot at one, and I didn't. And I was fortunate enough to be able to get out. I had a way out, but if I didn't get a shot at that one the second sit, it would have been kind of over because it was just too intrusive and the deer were starting to catch on, and I had to get it done within 2 sits. That was it. That's a max. And if I can't get it done in 2 sits in a location, I know I've done something wrong. I know I need to look back at what I'm doing. I either went in at the wrong time, I didn't have enough data, or I messed it up. I actually tipped my hand to the deer and I've messed up that spot, and I really just need to move on if I haven't had that shot after a couple sits at that spot. And so then it's the cool-off period. How long do you wait? Well, again, is it 5 days? It's much more than 5 days. I'd say at least 2 weeks. So that public land spot, I gave it some time, and then about 3 weeks or so later, I started hunting it a little bit again, and I started seeing some more deer movement. So it kind of rebounded in that time frame. Also, you can kind of look at it as those parts of the season. I listed 5 of them: early season, lull, pre-rut, rut, post-rut, late season, right? Those windows of about 2 weeks, at least one window needs to have passed before you can think about hunting that spot again. More than that, if possible. But those are the kind of factors you have to kind of think about as you look at, okay, how many spots do I really need to go out every hunt and it be fresh and me have a really good chance at a deer I want to shoot? And that's not even including the data that would tell you whether a spot should be hunted or not. This is just talking about how much wait time and how you keep them fresh and keep that first, what I call the first sit effect, the first sit in that location, which is going to be your best. And so those are things you have to think about as you diversify your portfolio of spots and think about how many you need, right? How many times are you realistically going to hunt this year? What time of year are they? Do your spots align with hunting those properly, right? If you have a rut spot that you know is good for the rut, let's say it's a deeper bedding area or the edge of a bedding area, and you hunt that the first day of season a few times, you're kind of messing that up for quite a while and shooting yourself in the foot for further later on in the season. And so you really have to think about those things and be honest about whether a spot is huntable in a certain time of year and when you can go in there or not. And as you look at, okay, I want to hunt or will probably hunt 10, 15, 20 times this year, whatever the number is, and when that will be and how many spots you actually can hunt during those times. And so as you look at your portfolio of spots, really look at how that plays out. Public land's a little different than private. Private land in my backyard, for example, I have a spot that you can engineer private land, right? So I have a spot that I can go back, I can slip in and slip out very easily without deer knowing I'm hunting it. But even with that, even with this rock solid entry and exit, like you can many times try to do on private land, if you can engineer it right and keep it really low impact, I will still maybe get 4 or 5 hunts back there every year max, right? I just can't hunt it as much as I might want to or what people might think you can. And so you really have to be honest about that as you're looking at diversification of your hunting spots and your portfolio. as a way to get to this goal of being a highly effective and consistent hunter. You really need to know that whatever time of season it is, wherever you go out, that you just have a really good chance to take a deer there, and it's a fresh, good spot because of that. And let me back up and say a spot. Let's define what a spot is. Is a spot, a tree stand here and one 20 yards away, and one's for an east wind and one's for a west wind? Are those two different spots, or is that one spot? I would say a spot is a place you can hunt without messing up another hunting spot, right? Whatever that distance is, depending on the terrain, how thick an area is, whatever it may be, how you get in and out, right? Can you hunt in one spot without messing up your chances at another spot? I'd say those are separate. If they're arranged in such a way that if you hunt one, you kind of already messed it up for another spot too, I wouldn't call those different spots. So really think about that as you tally up your spots into how many you need for the time of year to have the most first sit opportunities, which will give you the best results. Okay, so here are your high IQ takeaways and one big challenge. Take a look at your portfolio of spots and honestly assess the time of season you should actually hunt them, if they are morning or evening spots, and how many hunts you can actually realistically get out of your supply of spots. Then look at how many times you want to be able to hunt and see if these jive. Do you need to beef up your portfolio? Really think about that. Okay, and next time we continue with my friend Mark talking about proper data collection and a different way to think about it to make really smart hunting decisions this year, which is crucial. You won't want to miss that, and I'll see you then.